Hi everybody and welcome to this webinar, Communication and the Challenges. My name's Leanne and I'm joined by my colleague Cris. Hi Cris.
Hi everyone.
We're both consultants and together we'll be reflecting about the challenges of communication. KidsMatter is funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue. Early Childhood Australia is partnering with Beyond Blue and in-school context Headspace to support whole services in schools in implementing the KidsMatter framework and undertaking the professional learning that goes along with it. We'd like to ask you, is your service or school registered and participating in KidsMatter? You might like to consider that throughout this webinar today. You'll find a link to registering your service in the chat box. If you are already an official service, great news, because our webinars will help support your progress through the professional learning, and we'll have a whole range of series of webinars scheduled over the coming months. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat about participation and growing healthy minds and wellbeing. Now, let's get back to today and our topic of communication and the challenges.
Welcome everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners from all the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and to all those who continue to hold the memories, traditions and ways of being for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We recognise the importance of the continued connection to culture, country, community, to the health, social and emotional wellbeing of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. If you know the country that you're meeting on, there's a question in the chat about popping that in there for us. Early Childhood Australia has a strong commitment to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander reconciliation, and this is actually outlined in its Reconciliation Action Plan Stretch 2018 to 2020. Based on the actions outlined in the ECA RAP stretch, I encourage you to consider how we can all communicate in a way that maintains awareness of how culture and context influence children and families. How we respectfully communicate on a daily basis can support practical reconciliation and build positive futures for all children. Just want to thank those of you who've popped in the chat the country on which you're meeting. If you don't know the country on which you're meeting, you might like to find that out. Thank you. What's coming up on screen now is ways for today. Each of these symbols represents a way that guides our participation today. We're all here to consider, learn and reflect on the role of communication in early childhood health and mental health and wellbeing. We also need to keep ourselves safe and create a safe place for participation today. This is represented by the third symbol on the slide. A sense of safety, foundational to positive mental health, a sense of security and for positive relationships. This is about creating an environment in which people feel safe to be who they are and are able to work to their strengths, express their opinions and beliefs and feel heard and respected even when there are opposing views. You'll be asked to contribute often today. Please contribute only what you feel comfortable via the chat. Be mindful of your responses to others and observe confidentiality in any stories that you might share. The other aspect of safety is taking care of yourself. This is very important, so please remember to take care of yourself as we talk about mental health today. As you engage, be aware of feelings that might come up for you. Sometimes unexpected feelings can emerge and sometimes they can even be difficult. So have a plan and make sure you talk to somebody who can help, or if you need to, seek professional support. Turning our attention to the topic for today, effective communication is at the heart of building positive relationships. Positive relationships are built on shared understandings and conversations, sharing with each other, socialising and supporting each other. Conversation wave symbol, the last on the slide, encourages us to consider and acknowledge the importance of continuing to learn about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. Charting and ways of communicating are essential in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of being, knowing and doing. Okay. What's come on screen is the 4 learning outcomes today. Obviously, the focus is effective communication for positive relationships, as well as strategies to support this. While I'm introducing these 4 learning outcomes, you might like to pop in the chat some of the achievements or challenges that you've had around communication at your place. There are 4 learning outcomes today. Communication skills for positive relationships. Here we reflect on how effective communication between educators and parents can build trust and a shared understanding, which helps to foster respectful relationships. This includes active listening. Effective communication with families is something else we'll explore. We'll also explore how you and your everyday work are developing and demonstrating your communication skills and experience in a range of circumstances, including some that are challenging and complex. In these situations, you draw on all your experience and skills to think how best to approach these conversations with families. Establishing a strong partnership with families and engaging in regular communication can help these challenging conversations, conflicts and/or disagreements. Active listening or learning about active listening is another outcome for today. How much thought have you put into the way you listen? Active listening involves a set of skills. Some come naturally to some people and others have to be learned and practiced. Finally, we'll explore the use of the stop, act, reflect model. This framework can be extremely helpful during interactions with families. It can assist us to support and hear families. Although the framework can be used at any stage of interaction between families and educators, the best time to implement it is at the start of a conversation. We recognise that each of you brings different experience and expertise and skills today, and we acknowledge that some of the information presented may not be new to you. We encourage you to reflect on where you're at and share your stories in the chat. We'll also be taking some polls today and we look forward to your contribution.
Okay, now it's time for having a poll, just like Cris mentioned. So we're going to be talking about how we spend time communicating. So do you actually spend time reflecting on your communication styles? How do you do that? Is it by discussing it with your colleagues, or is it just in your head and thinking about other ways you can actually improve that? We often reflect on ways we do our engagement with children and our programming, but do we actually spend time to really reflect on our communication styles? Because we know that communication across early learning community is really important both for staff and for families. Maybe you can write in the chat what you spend most of your time reflecting about, and let us know what you're reflecting. So it's about how... Sorry, Cris?
Go ahead. I was just looking at the poll results. I think we're probably nearly finished there.
Oh. Well, it looked like there was over 50% of people actually reflecting about, often reflecting about how they communicate, which is really great to see. Yes.
So important, that reflection.
Absolutely, that's right. Perhaps, you know, is there any comments, perhaps, of ways that people actually are reflecting about their, what kind of things are you reflecting on? So is it about how you communicate with families, how you communicate with your team, with the children and your care, or is it about how you communicate about specific situations that have occurred? Yeah, we've got one message in the chat about communication between families and staff. The reflective practice is really important, and also to reflect within a team. And becoming a reflective team provides practical suggestions to encourage members of your group to think more deeply. But when reflecting about communicating, it's good to make sure it's a safe space where people can share it without judgment, and educators can share their personal experiences about how they're communicating and how different scenarios have actually gone. and so they can actually share with their team and get some ideas and, you know, some other ways of communicating better perhaps in the future.
Leanne, something else has come up in the chat. Somebody's popped in there that they reflect often on how they talk to children as well. That's very important as well. Our focus today is probably more on conversations with families, but that's an important thing to consider. These skills apply in our conversations with children as well.
Yes, definitely. That's right. And sometimes about those conversations that we're actually having with families about their children too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ready to move on?
Yeah, thank you. So now let's think about how we communicate with families or with our team or with children about specific situations. So what's my manner when I'm communicating? So how are you communicating? Do you stop and listen to what people are actually saying, or do you actually just give a quick response without even listening and taking time to think about what's being said? Do you have a particular parent or colleague that you don't really connect with, that you're actually avoiding for any particular reason? It could be that you don't know them very well. It could be that they're not really very approachable, which can happen. So in that case, it's about us to developing those relationships with the family so we feel a little bit more comfortable in actually talking to them. Am I aware of particular parents that I don't communicate with often? So it could be that you don't see those parents when they drop off their children, or you may just see them in the afternoon, or you might not get an opportunity to touch base with them very often. And so when you're spending most of your time communicating with those families, is it in the morning at drop-off, is it in the afternoon, or is it throughout the day? Do you suggest a time to meet with those families, which is less busy? Have you considered other ways to communicate through emails, phones or notes? And I know that a lot of services are now using different apps to actually communicate, which is also a great tool. So, and using those as a communication device. What sorts of things shouldn't say? So thinking about what are your responses, are they actually appropriate? Or maybe should you think about what it is that you're going to say before you respond? But you know, it's okay if you don't know the answer. So just let the parent know that you'll get back to them, but make sure that you do get back to them eventually and in a timely manner. So where should you have those conversations? Is it, as you know, at the front door? Is it in the car, in the room, in the service, or is it in the playground? Do you think those conversations in those places is it a private place, and is it respectful enough to the families and the children? We mentioned earlier about reflecting as a team. Perhaps you could make time to engage in some professional learning about communication. You could perhaps share this webinar with your team, discuss what communication styles people have, and perhaps share each other's strengths or concerns, and how people tackle tricky situations. You could develop a team approach to communication and making sure that these processes are clear with your whole team. There are some really great videos that are available, and also perhaps even looking at how other educators are connecting and communicating with families. Have a look at their body language, have a look at the ways that they're actually communicating and the relationship they have with those families. So if it's something that you're not really confident in, then actually watching and observing is a really great way to develop your skills and maybe even have a chat to them. Well, we know that talking with families is an art and something that many people don't consider when entering the profession of early childhood. So we need to practice the art of talking and listening regularly to families. Communication is a really important skill that we need to deliberately develop, and it's not necessarily something that does come naturally when talking with parents. It might be easy enough to actually have a conversation with a friend or a colleague, but when we're talking about in a parent educator relationship, it can be a little bit tricky, particularly if you've got some language barriers or if you've got some cultural barriers. So we need to really practice the art of talking and listening regularly. And usually common topics of communication between families and educators might include sharing developmental milestones or children's achievements, talking about children's friendships and play, and communicating about early childhood development, knowledge and parenting. It might also include talking about any relevant information relating to major family events or changes, and sharing concerns about children's wellbeing or behaviour. Talking with families can be challenging at times, but effective communication is a really critical part of a partnership with families and the basis for developing a positive and trusting relationship. And when communicating with families, consider the questions from the previous slide that was mentioned about who you're communicating with, why, when, and what you communicate. Let's consider different types of communication. We mentioned before about using apps. You're communicating mostly through verbal communication, non-verbal, written or electronic. Do you change your communication style or methods according to the families in your care? Is the way you're communicating, is it culturally appropriate? And do you actually have key people that communicate with often? Are you using open questions or closed questions? Perhaps you might like to put in the chat the communication skills that you use when talking with families. All right, so some people are using eye contact to show that they're listening and mirroring back what they're being saying, so paraphrase or rephrasing what's being said. Yes, it's very, very important to actually listen really carefully before you actually respond. And we'll talk about that. Cris mentioned at the beginning that we talked about the Stop, Reflect, Act framework, and that's a really great tool to use and gives you an opportunity to actually stop and think and reflect about actually responding. Being present with when you're actually having those conversations, perhaps having empathy with family, being aware of your body language and your facial expressions as well. We might move on to the next slide.
Okay, Leanne, having had that reflection on aspects of how we communicate with families, we're now going to consider another poll. So I'm going to ask you, what are the most significant challenges influencing how you communicate with families? So does this relate to how confident you are about knowing what to say and how to say it? Are there too many distractions for you? It's a busy time in a service with children always. Do families have the time to stop? Do they just drop their children off and go, or pick them up and leave quickly? What about language and cultural barriers? Are there any of those that you find challenging? Do families read any written communication that you provide to them? Or is there something else that you do find challenging? Certainly all of those things would be a challenge for those working in services.
It looks like quite a few people find the right time and place amongst all the distractions. It is because you're often having those conversations with families as they're coming and going. You've got children in your care, and not being able to find the right time or the right place to have those conversations, particularly if it's something a little bit more, a little bit more detailed.
Just looking at those poll results, Leanne, it's interesting that finding the right time and place amongst all the distractions has been the most frequent response given to the poll. We'll talk about how you maybe can think of how you can deal with that into the future a little later on in the presentation.
Yeah, and as I said, those drop and go when parents are in a rush to get going, and that thinking about other ways can you actually get those messages out and communicate? Perhaps, you know, is it about perhaps taking some time to have a quick phone call later on when you've got some time, you know, off the floor, or, you know, it is a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. And the other thing written there on that response to that poll was around families not reading written communication. You spoke before briefly about the use of apps for families. Yes, I wonder whether that's the kind of written communication that families would respond to more. Not sure, because we covered that in the poll.
That's right, and I guess it also depends on how tech-savvy families are too, isn't it, really?
Absolutely.
When it comes to using some of those, if it's accessible to them, or do they actually know how to use it? I was just thinking back, not so long ago, we sent a survey out to families to get some information, and we didn't get very many back. And it wasn't until I was talking to a colleague from another service, and they said, "Oh, we actually have iPads, so when the families actually come and drop their children off, we actually get them to fill out the survey on their iPad." And I went, "Oh my goodness, why did I not think of that? You know, at least you've actually got it there." So different ways of communicating. So if they're not filling it out from a link or through a hard copy, perhaps it's about actually being there and connecting.
That's a lovely way to do things as well, because if families need a bit of support with understanding what the information you're trying to get from them, you're there ready to help them as well. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. We're shifting our attention now to thinking about the skills that underpin effective communication. Focusing on the action chart in the slide, we encourage you to reflect on the many ways of knowing, being, doing and connecting that play a part in effective communication. We're going to discuss and explore active listening now. During this time, we encourage you to reflect and take note of the attending skills you're using yourself and those you notice others using. Okay. When we talk about attending, we mean focusing all our attention on what the person we are listening to is saying and doing. This means being fully present and having your mind free of distractions, as well as focusing on a broad range of communication cues, such as vocal quality and body language. Although this may seem simple, in the busy life of an educator, it can be a real challenge with all the distractions that are always surrounding you. And the internal chatter going on in your mind about the things that you have got to do, the things you shouldn't forget to do, and what you need to get to next. Attending is about being present for another person, and that involves 4 simple but critical forms of communication. The first is eye contact, and that's the most basic but significant indicator that we're listening. The eyes provide a very powerful connection to another person. We do, however, have to keep in mind cultural variation. This means that there are no specific rules for eye contact. So, for example, too much eye contact, especially with an authority figure, isn't considered appropriate in some cultures. So this will mean that you'll need to observe the person you're speaking to and use their level of eye contact to guide your own. Vocal quality is the second indicator of attending. The tone of your voice, the rate of your speech, your speaking volume can all indicate whether or not you're actually engaged in the conversation. For example, a slow, flat tone with no changes in your voice will often indicate boredom. In contrast, pauses, variations in inflection indicate empathy and understanding. The next form of attending is verbal tracking. It's also very important to being fully present in the conversation. Verbal tracking is about staying with the topic of interest that is being presented by the other person. Following the conversation and not changing the subject indicates to the other person that what they're saying is important, that you're paying attention and you're listening with interest. Attending in this way involves resisting the temptation to preempt what the other person might say or jumping in to tell them about when you've had a similar experience. Verbal tracking helps you stay in the moment and keep focused on the topic. Quite often we like to preempt what other people say, and that relates to how busy we are. Body language is the 4th form of attending, and this includes facial expressions. It signals to the other person that you're listening and you're engaged with the conversation. It generally helps to adopt an open posture without crossed arms or legs, lean slightly forward and present an expressive face, and make use of encouraging gestures. Once again, you'll need to be sensitive to cultural variations, but as a starting point, orientating yourself at an angle of 45 to 90 degrees to the other person is generally considered acceptable. More than half of what we communicate occurs via non-verbal cues, such as facial expressions and eye contact and body language. Now we're going to go to a poll. Thinking about the active listening skills that we've just discussed, think about, oh goodness.
That's okay, Cris. So we're talking about which attending skill you feel most confident and comfortable in using.
I beg your pardon.
That's okay. And so, and thinking about what you're confident in using, perhaps put in the chat what you're not so confident in doing. So is it about you're, a bit uncomfortable about your tone? I actually wanted to share a little anecdote. Actually, what happened to me when I was teaching, I had a child in my class, and normally I would contact the mother. If there was any issues or whatever I need to speak to her about. This one particular time, I wanted to contact the family because there was something great that was happening, and I wanted them to be a positive conversation rather than a negative. And so I phoned up the family, and I got the father on the phone, and which was fine. And I was telling him how this little girl was having such a great day, and then that he needed to come in, and we needed him to come in to actually collect something. But he didn't quite understand what I was saying, so I slowed down my speech and tried to speak a little bit more clearer. And they got quite offended. He thought that I was using a patronising tone, and I was really taken aback. And I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't realise that my tone had come across like that. And I was really, and often reflect about that because it was really, it was a really confronting moment. And when you don't have those visual cues like the facial expressions, the body language, and the eye contact, when it's over the phone, it can be interpreted different ways. So it's just really important for us to be aware of, how we're actually talking, particularly if a number of our conversations are over the phone, and how it's actually coming across and how people actually interpret that. I'll just have a look in the chat here. So yeah, when you're busy and parents want to talk, it's difficult sometimes. It is really difficult. And I suppose, like as parents, we all have that need to feel connected. And so if parents really want to connect with us, is there a way that we can actually do that, but also not you just try to distract us from what our work is with our children and taking care of the children. So what is it how can we actually provide an opportunity for those parents to connect with us? So I guess it's just a matter of thinking about who those family members are and the situation and how can we actually connect. So listening is a starting point for effective communication, and to be able to really listen to someone, we need to tune in to give them our full attention. And when we're tuned in like this, it allows us to be empathetic. And empathy is the effort we make to recognise, understand and respect the feelings of others. We demonstrate empathy through attending and through our active listening. And by active listening, we mean not only demonstrating that you're paying attention, but you've correctly heard what the other person has said. So a parent you talk to may not necessarily talk about their feelings, but you can interpret what those feelings are by tuning into them, listening to the tone of their voice, looking at their body language, or any other visual sign. And so this is called reading between the lines. I recently read an article about how to increase your empathy, and what they suggested is to do a few little activities, and one is actually asking someone how they're doing, but being really curious about it. And so just replacing your questions with statements. Replacing the statements with questions and asking them. And then just stop and really listen to what they're saying. Ask them how they're going and how they're doing. And listening with more than one of your senses. Paying attention to the person's body language and their facial expression and their overall demeanour, as well as what they say. So practice interacting with different people too. So you can do this with the cashier at the supermarket or your barista or even with your best friend. We tend to breeze through some interactions on autopilot, but if you want to really actively work on connecting with others, try and do this at least once a day is what the suggestion was. Ask the questions sincerely so they know that you actually want to know and are not necessarily looking for a quick, automated, I'm good, it's okay. It's really only a slight change of inflection in the question and people will know that you really mean it. Keep in mind that sympathy means feeling compassion for others, whereas empathy is the ability to understand and even feel the emotions of others. It's deeper and more personal. When you ask someone how they're doing, make sure you do it in a way that shows you actually want a personal answer. And if you wanted to explore the difference between empathy and sympathy, you may or may not have seen a little YouTube clip by Brené Brown. It's a really excellent little visual. It's a cartoon that gives a really simple explanation on the differences between sympathy and empathy. And I really highly recommend you have a look at it. Okay. And so to gain an understanding of active listening, we need to focus on these 5 skills. We're going to be talking about minimal encourages, reflection, questioning, summarising, pauses and silences. Let's start with minimal encourages. These are brief prompts that we use to encourage the flow of our conversation. Verbal encourages are things such as yes, okay, I see, and the like. Non-verbal encourages include nods and gestures, smiles and other facial expressions. These indicate that you're engaging with what's being said without any of them interrupting the flow of the speaker. So have a think about what minimal encourages do you use most frequently? Perhaps you might like to share those in the chat. The next active listening skill is reflection. So this involves paraphrasing or restating the content, the feelings and the meanings of the words that you've actually heard. Reflection encourages parents to express themselves further and helps to promote trust in a conversation. It also shows that you have empathy for their situation. A powerful use of reflection is to reflect the feeling of what they're saying or showing through their body language and why they might be feeling that way. For example, it sounds like you're worried about your son because he hasn't wanted to come to childcare. Reflection helps the parent feel they've been listened to and helps the conversation on track. It can also help the parent clarify their thoughts. The third skill is questioning. There's 2 types of questions, open and closed questions. Both are really useful in active listening, although each serves a different purpose. The open questions encourage more detailed responses rather than requiring a yes or no answer. Example of open questions might be, what are you concerned about your son? Or tell me about how it happened. Open questions draw the speaker out and allow access to deeper, more meaningful information. Closed questions are used to obtain facts or prompt for specific information. Questions of this kind can be answered with a single word or a phrase. They're useful if you need to refocus a conversation. They can also decrease nervousness and hostility by focusing on concrete details, such as, have you had a good morning? Or does Johnny have his hat today? The next skill of active listening is summarising. Summarising allows you to organise and succinctly express the content, feelings and meanings of what you've heard. It allows us to review what's happened through a conversation, transition from one topic to another and conclude the interaction at the appropriate time. Such as, I'll find out some information about fighting for you and I'll email it to you. Is that okay? Finally, let's talk about pauses and silences. Pauses encourages a parent to continue talking, and silences are useful when a parent is still thinking about what has been said. Resist the temptation to fill the silence because the parent might be able to open up a little bit more. Learning to recognise when silences are needed and how long these should be is an important aspect of active listening. As you can see, there's a lot when it comes to good communication. And I think sometimes those pauses and silences are something we often try and fill the gap in, because we think that we want to, we need to fill that gap. But, like, some people actually need that time to process and think about what their response is going to be. So it's good to be aware that those pauses and silences are really important in those conversations, particularly if you're having tricky conversations and you're not really quite sure how to respond. All right, so we're going to move on to a poll.
Yeah, and just picking up on a couple of things in the chat around the kinds of active listening skills that participants have been using. What's come up is questioning and reflection. Pauses and silences. Somebody said pauses and silences really help with talking to parents. So, yeah, interesting that you raised that one. Here's the poll, just thinking about those active listening skills that Leanne just discussed. This poll's asking you to consider which active listening skills you're going to start using more often when communicating with families. So this will be interesting. I think we're all pretty comfortable with some of those. And the poll's actually reflecting that as well. People are comfortable using minimal encourages and reflection and questioning. But these are things that they're going to use more of when they go back to their services.
Yeah, and I think it's great that, as I said, pauses and silences, I think that that's something that some people often feel a bit uncomfortable about, because we feel like we really need to keep the conversation going. But, it's time to actually, those pauses allow us to actually think about what's being said and responding appropriately.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting is that the non-verbal cues that you give during those silences can also support communication as well.
Yeah.
It really does depend on the conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And that eye contact, I think, can also, we can actually see, what people are thinking and what they're doing.
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's move on. We'll talk about, so we've talked a lot about communication skills and how we can communicate with others. So now let's look at how thoughtful, timely and appropriate responses benefit our communication. So our responses support developing and maintaining positive relationships and ultimately lead to better outcomes in mental health and wellbeing. So now we're going to look at the Stop, Reflect, Act framework for effective communication. And everybody can learn to stop, reflect and act, educators, families and children. This poster could serve as a useful reminder in your service about the benefits of using the Stop, Reflect, Act framework when communicating with each other. And so let's have a look at how it works. When we stop, it gives us a moment to make sure we don't launch into autopilot. It takes time to listen and to learn. Going into autopilot often means we speak and act before pausing to reflect. That's those pauses and silences we spoke about. We need to stop before we react into the situation, pause and listen before responding to the question. This involves stopping what you're doing and focusing on the current situation, but you don't actually need to do anything because you're actually stopping, pausing and listening. When we reflect on the moment, we can consider our thoughts and feelings, everyone's physical and emotional safety, and what we know and what else we might need before deciding how to act in a purposeful and intentional way. So you can think about reflecting as thinking time to think about the situation, to engage in self-reflection and think about how you could go forward with the question. Still, there's no action needs to be taken at this point. So think about the timing. So is it a good time to answer this question? Is it a drop-off time or pick-up time for families? Do you need to attend to other duties? And how immediate is the question? Is it something that the parent needs an answer right then and there, or is it something you can get back to them with? Can you answer the question based on your own skills, knowledge and experience? We know that parents often come to educators because they feel that we have the knowledge and skills about raising children and caring for children, So they might ask you questions that you might not feel confident in actually answering. So you could actually say to them, you know, that's a really great question. Perhaps, you know, thinking about who you need to contact or any resources that you might need to get for them. There could be somebody else in your service that can provide that information for you. How are you feeling right now about what the parent said to you? Is it something that's really upset you? Are you feeling a bit confused or angry? Or are you feeling calm? So that's a really great opportunity for you to reflect and go, you know what, I'm feeling quite upset about what's been said now. Probably not the best time to respond or to act, and take that time to actually think about what it is you're going to do and say. When we act, we don't need to completely solve an issue or even have answers to questions. You might simply act in a way that prepares for the next step. For example, finding a quiet place to talk or negotiating another time to meet. This could likely lead to more stop, reflect, act moments as well. Taking action after you're consulting with colleagues, if you need to, requires you to respond to the question by acknowledging and affirming the parent. You could start with an opening statement such as, I'm glad you came to me to talk. That's a really great question, and let's find out together. Or, that's a really important question or concern. I want to be able to give you the time to really talk about this properly. Perhaps we can take some time to chat. Remember, use active listening skills such as intending, following, reflecting what parents are saying. It's a normal reaction to go straight into act when we are asked a question, but when we do this, we may not read the parent's messages or their query properly.
Okay, Leanne.
Are you there, Cris?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, Leanne. Sorry.
That's okay.
I was just looking at the chat, and it doesn't appear that people have said too much around that act, reflect, the stop, act, reflect model. I was just reflecting on that myself. And you spoke when you were presenting the information about the importance of taking the time to think about whether this was a good time to have the conversation. That's actually been my experience. That model's been particularly useful to me. When I worked in the field, I sometimes came across families who would come in, a parent would be upset about something, and I think the stopping and thinking and trying to understand why they were upset was particularly important, and making a time where they could talk to me and I could be calm and more responsive. So, you know, when they walk in the gate and they're upset, it's about trying to find that time. Part of that stopping, acting, reflecting is about trying to find the appropriate time, and also to gather your thoughts about how you can respond to them. Particularly important to validate their feelings, I think. But yeah, I've found that a particularly useful model in the past. I'm not sure whether you have or not, Leanne.
Oh, definitely, because, you know, yeah, sometimes you're in situations where you go, you know what, I just don't have the answers. I'm not really quite sure how to respond to this. And so that's why it's really important to actually draw on those colleagues, because you might have people that you're working with who have really great skills in that area, and they can actually help you with that.
Yeah.
I remember a fellow educator was having a discussion with a parent, and the parent was not very happy about something, and she felt really uncomfortable about it. So it was fortunate that I was able to actually go in there and sort of try to diffuse the conversation and actually provide that support. And so I think that that's really important to actually support your colleagues. So if they do actually are having a bit difficulty in communicating with their families, with parents, then you know, you can draw on each other and actually help support each other. And I think that's really important, working as a team that way.
Yeah. I think it's quite obvious too when one of your colleagues needs to be helped out as well. Yeah.
Mm.
So some of the other things we can think about, the other situations where the stop, act, reflect model might be useful is thinking about parents who are anxious about a child. You know, and when they stop you at the door first thing in the morning, and they might have some anxiety about something that's happening for their child as well. I think stop reflecting and acting is particularly important there. An off-the-cuff remark can probably send them their anxiety levels a bit higher. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a situation like that, Leanne?
Yeah, and I think that it's really important to really empathise with those families, because they're having to deal with this themselves, and it's just like, how do you actually help support them actually get through that? Because they're obviously really uptight and anxious, and they're really seeking some support from you to actually feel a little bit more grounded, and how can we actually support and actually alleviate some of that anxiety that they might have. And I think we have a really important role in that. And that, as I said, those relationships and connections are really, really, really important. And it's about building that relationship with family. It's about getting to know them so you can actually feel comfortable in actually helping support them. Because if you don't have the relationship with them, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult for them to trust you and to actually, to really value what you're saying.
Absolutely, Leanne. Let's just thinking about that just a little more now. Let's think about whether you've ever had a situation where there's been a communication barrier when you're actually discussing a concern with a family, and how you might have dealt with that.
Yeah, I wonder if there's anybody in our audience who actually has had a situation like that, where there's what do you do when there actually is that language barrier?
Yeah.
Is it about finding somebody and I suppose that's where that body language comes in, isn't it? Really, so they can actually see that that you're really trying to connect with them. Is it about finding somebody? Perhaps there might be other families in your service who either speak the same language or might actually help to to communicate that way. We often find it's different services. Parents can also connect with each other, and they might even have relationships outside of the service. And so, if they're actually, if you've had an opportunity to help them to connect, they can actually help support that too.
Yeah. Look, in the past, I've used interpreters, and that's worked really well. Sometimes it's difficult to find an interpreter, and it may take a bit of time. So, communicating using the other cues that we have available to us, using body language, providing eye contact, using gestures, those kinds of things can still be reassuring for families. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, I was talking to an educator recently, and she was saying that she has a very multicultural community in families, and they actually have an app on their phone. And so the parent actually, and that's how they communicate. So it's all through this particular app. So they type their message on their phone and then show it to the educator, which translates into English, and then she'll actually write something else and actually communicate that back. So that's a really interesting way of communicating and getting over those language barriers. So it's pretty amazing what technology can do today.
Well, look, that's actually something that's just come up in the chat. Somebody's contributed saying that they write it all down and translate it through Google. And Google Translate works quite well. So somebody said that they find an educator with the same language of the family, and that sometimes you have an educator in your service who has the same language as the family. And sometimes somebody's popped in here, older children can help with interpretation as well. So you've got some good strategies there, haven't you, to use if you need to. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Time to move on, is there? Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Okay. So now it's probably time for us to actually take some time to consider and reflect on the content of the webinar. So if we look at the slide on screen and see the symbol, that's the acknowledge, consider and celebrate symbol on screen. So the starburst represents a powerful and colourful coming together of various histories, cultures and peoples. In this starburst we see, hear and feel and know the beauty and strength of reconciliation for everyone. This energy propels, incites, motivates, moves, causes change and gives us strength to try new ways, always building on new knowledge, new and old. The waves represent different paths, directions and progress flowing from the starburst. Sometimes we flow with the river, navigating the ups and downs. Sometimes we're connected to land, keeping to the same path and working together for young children. The arrows represent direction, moving forward on a continuous journey into the known and the unknown. Together the starburst and waves form a symbol that speaks to a vibrant energy, motivating, inspiring individuals, teams and communities. Possibilities are connected and grounded to place, to wisdom and to people who care deeply about children's mental health.
And so what does this mean for us in relation to communication and its challenges? We'd like you to have a think about, why you came today and acknowledge what you've learned and thinking about what are your takeaways. So for educators, when we thoughtfully acknowledge our current practice, we consider possibilities for change and celebrate success. We engage in the process of continuous improvement that builds quality. And for our community, when we genuinely acknowledge our rich diversity, we consider all perspectives and celebrate histories, peoples and cultures, we build belonging and connectedness. For each of us, as we reflect on our practice today, we acknowledge our identities, taking time to consider ourselves and the part we play, and celebrate our unique contributions. In the previous poll, we looked at which aspect of active listening that you're going to focus on. So what's one action you'll take to improve your communication skills tomorrow? Or it might be next week, or it might be next month. Share these in the chat and make a commitment to improving your practice. And think about why you came today, and do you have any questions? Maybe you might like to add those to the chat. It looks like somebody's typing something. Yeah.
I'll give you a few minutes to get that into the chat.
As many of you know, these webinars are a great way to not only learn, reflect and put learning into action, they also assist in demonstrating our individual commitment to continued professional development. That's right, and I think reflecting on what we're learning is really important so we can actually think about how we're going to put it into practice. So someone said pauses and silences, so that's one of the things that they're actually going to practice doing. But have you heard with our professional learning that you can also support documentation and guide your whole service or school professional learning and continuous improvement? By contacting our team today, we can assist you. For anyone already with a participating service, we can assist you by contacting your consultant, and we can actually help support you through the framework.
Leanne, we've got another response in the chat about commitment to doing something after the webinar.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So more reflection and using active listening skills and considering the use of minimal encourages, questioning, summarising and pauses and silences. So one of the others was focusing on pauses and silences. So, yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Another one's just come up.
Sorry,
go ahead, Leanne. You go ahead.
Yeah, and so that's about using the webinar was really great and helpful to update knowledge and skills, which is really great. So I think that, having these professional conversations are really great because it actually helps us to think about, you know what, we're doing really great stuff. We can actually just, perhaps tweak some of my skills a little bit more, or I can use those skills to actually help support somebody else. So if your service or school isn't a registered participating service, it's as simple as completing this short online form and then getting started. So if you'd like to know more about what's involved, check out how to start the experience today. Let your consultant know what you've learned and acted on after this event, and it could be all you need to finish one of our professional learning topics and to receive another certificate. Join a check-in event with the consultant and talk about what you've learned and done. Remember, check-ins aren't checkups. Often consultants spot great learning in action that's been done without educators noticing. It's often easier for a pair of outside eyes and ears to notice.
That's lovely. Just before we close, there's a couple of other things that have come into the chat. Somebody's just indicated that the webinars reinforced and reminded them of active listening skills that they'd learnt before, and it was good to revisit them. She's going to reflect on whether she really uses them or not. So, yes, the key there is practice. All right, we're about to close. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. I was just about to say, Cris, that I think that, you know, one of the takeaways that is probably a good takeaway is to think about those families that you're not connecting with so much, and how actually can you increase those opportunities to communicate, because it's easy to chat and have a conversation and communicate with people we know really well, or families who have been with us for a long time, but it's harder to strike up and develop that relationship with families, with the new families perhaps, or those who are a little bit standoffish. So it's really important to really connect with those people, because you really don't know what they're going through and what support they actually need.
Okay, just before we do close, I just want to remind you to complete the exit survey that will be put up on screen soon, and include the names of all the people who are with you today, so they get a certificate too. Thank you for attending, and thank you for your participation today and sharing your thoughts. We hope to see you online again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.